The rain fell softly on the streets of Pine Ridge that Tuesday evening, making the pavement shine under the streetlights. Officer James Mercer sat in his patrol car at the corner of Maple and Fifth, his fingers tapping impatiently on the steering wheel. His shift was almost over, but he wasn't ready to clock out yet. His fellow officers often joked that Mercer had a sixth sense for finding trouble, but the truth was far less magical and far more troubling. For the past 5 years, Mercer had built a reputation in the department. Some rookies looked up to him for his high number of stops and searches. What they didn't talk about was how most of those stops happened in neighborhoods where black families had recently moved in, or how rarely those stops led to actual arrests for anything serious. Tonight, Mercer's attention fixed on a black BMW driving down the street. The car wasn't speeding. In fact, it was going slightly under the limit. The windows were tinted but legal. The license plate was clearly visible, and the car was in perfect condition. By all accounts, there was absolutely no reason to pull this driver over. But Mercer flipped on his lights anyway. Through his rearview mirror, Dr. Kimberly Washington saw the flashing blue and red lights and felt her stomach tighten. Not again, she thought, carefully signaling and pulling over to the curb. She had been through this drill more times than she cared to remember. As a successful black woman who drove a nice car, getting pulled over for no reason had become an unwelcome part of her life. Today should have been purely joyful. After years of working her way up through the ranks of city government, she had finally started her new job as the head of internal affairs for the police department. The mayor himself had recruited her, impressed by her record of fair but firm leadership and her background in both law and psychology. Her mission was clear: clean up the department's reputation after several high-profile incidents of misconduct and build better relationships with the community. Now, sitting in her car watching the officer approach in her mirror, she took a deep breath and reminded herself of the advice she'd given her younger brother so many times. Stay calm, move slowly, keep your hands visible. Officer Mercer swaggered toward the BMW, flashlight pointed directly at the driver's side window, even though it wasn't fully dark yet. The beam bounced off the glass, revealing a woman in the driver's seat. He tapped on the window with his knuckle, harder than necessary. Dr. Washington pressed the button to lower her window, the soft hum of the electric motor filling the tense silence. License and registration, Mercer demanded without introducing himself or explaining why he'd pulled her over. His free hand rested near his weapon, a detail Dr. Washington didn't miss. "Good evening, officer," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter of anger and anxiety in her chest. "May I ask why I've been stopped?" Mercer's face hardened. "I'll ask the questions here, ma'am. License and registration now." Dr. Washington nodded, then spoke clearly. "I'm going to reach for my purse on the passenger seat to get my license, and then I'll get the registration from the glove compartment." She moved deliberately, pulling out her wallet from her designer purse. As she did, her new city ID badge slipped slightly, the lanyard tangled with her wallet. She handed over her driver's license first. "My registration is in the glove box," she explained. "Go ahead," Mercer said, studying her license with a frown. "Where are you coming from at this hour, Ms. Washington?" "Dr. Washington," she corrected gently. "I'm coming from City Hall. My first day at a new position." Mercer made a non-committal sound as she handed in her registration. "And what kind of doctor are you exactly? This isn't a hospital area." "I have a PhD in organizational psychology," she explained, watching his face carefully. "I work for the city now." "This car seems pretty expensive for a city's salary," he remarked, shining his flashlight around the interior of her car. "Mind if I take a look around?" Dr. Washington's patience began to wear thin. "Actually, officer, I do mind. Unless you have probable cause, I don't consent to a search. And you still haven't told me why you pulled me over." Mercer's expression darkened, clearly not used to being questioned. What he didn't realize was that his entire interaction was about to change his career forever. Officer Mercer swaggered toward the BMW, flashlight beam cutting through the early evening drizzle. He aimed it directly at the driver's side window, though it wasn't even dark enough to need one yet. It was a power move he perfected over years. The harsh light would make the driver squint and feel uncomfortable right from the start. "License and registration," he barked before the window had fully lowered. No greeting, no explanation for the stop. His right hand hovered near his holster, something he did out of habit with certain drivers. Dr. Washington kept her face neutral despite the familiar burn of frustration rising in her chest. She'd been in this exact situation more times than she could count. Each time, the same indignity, the same unspoken accusation, "You don't belong here." "Good evening, officer," she said, her voice measured and clear. "May I ask why I've been stopped?" Mercer's jaw tightened. He'd hated when they asked questions instead of just doing what they were told. "I'll ask the questions here, ma'am. License and registration. Now." "I'm going to reach for my purse on the passenger seat." Dr. Washington narrated her movements, something her father had taught her years ago. "Then I'll get the registration from the glove compartment." She moved with deliberate slowness, pulling her designer purse closer. The soft leather felt out of place in this tense moment, a reminder of the life she'd built, one that officers like this couldn't seem to believe she deserved. As she handed over her driver's license, Mercer snatched it from her fingers. His eyes narrowed as he read the address, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in town. "This your current address?" He didn't even try to hide the disbelief in his voice. "Yes, officer. For the past 3 years." Dr. Washington kept her voice level despite the insult. "The registration is in the glove box." "Go ahead," he said, watching her every move like she might suddenly pull out something dangerous from her meticulously organized glove compartment. Dr. Washington handed him the neatly folded registration papers. As she did, her new city ID badge slipped from her purse, the lanyard dangling over the edge. She quickly tucked it back in, but not before Mercer's eyes flicked toward it. "What were you doing in this neighborhood tonight?" he questioned, his tone suggesting she couldn't possibly have legitimate business here. "I'm on my way home from work," she replied simply. "At this hour? Where do you work?" "I just finished my first day at a new position with the city," she said, choosing her words carefully. Mercer's face twisted into something between a smirk and a frown. "And what position would that be?" "I work in an administrative capacity," she said, deliberately vague. Years of experience had taught her that revealing too much information during these stops rarely worked in her favor. Mercer shined his flashlight around the interior of her car, lingering on the expensive leather seats, the high-end dashboard, the briefcase on the back seat embossed with her initials. "Nice car for a city employee," he remarked, his tone dripping with suspicion, mind stepping out of the vehicle. Dr. Washington felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "May I ask why, officer?" "I still don't know why I was pulled over." "I noticed you driving erratically," he lied smoothly. "And now I detect the smell of alcohol." It was a blatant fabrication. Dr. Washington didn't drink, and they both knew there was no smell. But it was a tactic she'd seen before, an excuse to escalate the stop. "Officer, that's simply not true," she said, her calm facade beginning to crack. "I was driving under the speed limit and following all traffic laws, and there is absolutely no alcohol in this car or in my system." Mercer's face hardened. He wasn't used to being challenged. "Step out of the car, ma'am." "Before I do that," Dr. Washington said, reaching slowly for her purse, "I think you should see this." She pulled out her city ID badge, the one she'd received just that morning. It gleamed under the flashlight beam, the gold-embossed city seal catching the light, the words clear and unmistakable. "Dr. Kimberly Washington, Ph.D., Director, Internal Affairs Division, Police Oversight." For a moment, the only sound was the soft patter of rain on the car roof and the distant whoosh of passing traffic. Mercer's face went through a remarkable transformation, shock, disbelief, and then something close to fear. "I would still like to know," Dr. Washington said into the silence, her voice now firm with authority, "exactly why you pulled me over tonight, officer." She leaned forward slightly to read his name tag. "Officer Mercer." Officer Mercer swaggered toward the BMW, flashlight beam cutting through the early evening drizzle. He aimed it directly at the driver's side window, that it wasn't even dark enough to need one yet. It was a power move he perfected over years. The harsh light would make the driver squint and feel uncomfortable right from the start. "License and registration," he barked before the window had fully lowered. No greeting, no explanation for the stop. His right hand hovered near his holster, something he did out of habit with certain drivers. Dr. Washington kept her face neutral despite the familiar burn of frustration rising in her chest. She'd been in this exact situation more times than she could count. Each time, the same indignity, the same unspoken accusation, "You don't belong here." "Good evening, officer," she said, her voice measured and clear. "May I ask why I've been stopped?" Mercer's jaw tightened. He'd hated when they asked questions instead of just doing what they were told. "I'll ask the questions here, ma'am. License and registration, now." "I'm going to reach for my purse on the passenger seat." Dr. Washington narrated her movements, something her father had taught her years ago. "Then I'll get the registration from the glove compartment." She moved with deliberate slowness, pulling her designer purse closer. The soft leather felt out of place in this tense moment, a reminder of the life she built, one that officers like this couldn't seem to believe she deserved. As she handed over her driver's license, Mercer snatched it from her fingers. His eyes narrowed as he read the address, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in town. "This your current address?" He didn't even try to hide the disbelief in his voice. "Yes, officer, for the past 3 years." Dr. Washington kept her voice level despite the insult. "The registration is in the glove box." "Go ahead," he said, watching her every move like she might suddenly pull out something dangerous from her meticulously organized glove compartment. Dr. Washington handed him the neatly folded registration papers. As she did, her new city ID badge slipped from her purse, the lanyard dangling over the edge. She quickly tucked it back in, but not before Mercer's eyes flicked toward it. "What were you doing in this neighborhood tonight?" he questioned, his tone suggesting she couldn't possibly have legitimate business here. "I'm on my way home from work," she replied simply. "At this hour? Where do you work?" "I just finished my first day at a new position with the city," she said, choosing her words carefully. Mercer's face twisted into something between a smirk and a frown. "And what position would that be?" "I work in an administrative capacity," she said, deliberately vague. Years of experience had taught her that revealing too much information during these stops rarely worked in her favor. Mercer shined his flashlight around the interior of her car, lingering on the expensive leather seats, the high-end dashboard, the briefcase on the back seat embossed with her initials. "Nice car for a city employee," he remarked, his tone dripping with suspicion. "Mind stepping out of the vehicle?" Dr. Washington felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "May I ask why, officer?" "I still don't know why I was pulled over." "I noticed you driving erratically," he lied smoothly. "And now I detect the smell of alcohol." It was a blatant fabrication. Dr. Washington didn't drink, and they both knew there was no smell. But it was a tactic she'd seen before, an excuse to escalate the stop. "Officer, that's simply not true," she said, her calm facade beginning to crack. "I was driving under the speed limit and following all traffic laws. And there is absolutely no alcohol in this car or in my system." Mercer's face hardened. He wasn't used to being challenged. "Step out of the car, ma'am." "Before I do that," Dr. Washington said, reaching slowly for her purse, "I think you should see this." She pulled out her city ID badge, the one she'd received just that morning. It gleamed under the flashlight beam, the gold-embossed city seal catching the light, the words clear and unmistakable. "Dr. Kimberly Washington, Ph.D., Director, Internal Affairs Division, Police Oversight." For a moment, the only sound was the soft patter of rain on the car roof and the distant whoosh of passing traffic. Mercer's face went through a remarkable transformation, shock, disbelief, and then something close to fear. "I would still like to know," Dr. Washington said into the silence, her voice now firm with authority, "exactly why you pulled me over tonight, officer." She leaned forward slightly to read his name tag. Officer Mercer. The next morning came too quickly for Officer Mercer. He barely slept, his mind replaying the traffic stop over and over. Each time he remembered the moment Dr. Washington revealed her ID badge, his stomach twisted into a tighter knot. By 6 a.m., he gave up trying to sleep and dragged himself into the shower, letting the hot water run over him as if it could wash away what had happened. When he walked into the precinct, something felt different. The usual morning chatter died down as he passed. Officers who normally greeted him with a friendly nod suddenly found their coffee cups fascinating. At his desk, a simple note waited for him. "Chief's office, 8:30 a.m." Mercer glanced at the clock, 8:22. He loosened his collar, which suddenly felt too tight, and made his way through the bullpen. As he passed the break room, he overheard two desk sergeants whispering. "That's him," one said. "The one who pulled over the new internal affairs director." The second officer shook his head. "Man of all the cars on the road." Mercer pretended not to hear, but his ears burned. Word traveled fast in the department, too fast. Outside the chief's office, he took a deep breath and knocked. Chief Rodriguez's voice called him in. The chief wasn't alone. Dr. Washington sat in one of the chairs facing the desk, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. On the desk between them sat a laptop, paused on what looked like dashboard camera footage. "Officer Mercer," Chief Rodriguez said, his voice carefully neutral. "Thank you for coming in. Please, have a seat." Mercer lowered himself into the empty chair, careful to keep his eyes forward, not daring to look directly at Dr. Washington. "I believe you two met last night," the chief continued. There was no humor in his voice. "Yes, sir," Mercer managed, his mouth dry. Dr. Washington finally turned to face him. Up close, in the daylight, she looked even more formidable than she had through his car window. Her eyes were sharp and assessing, missing nothing. "Officer Mercer," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I've been reviewing your record this morning." Mercer felt his heart skip. His record. The complaints that had been dismissed. The patterns no one had bothered to look for. "I've also been reviewing the footage from last night," she continued, gesturing to the laptop. "Chief Rodriguez and I were just discussing how this fits into a larger pattern we're seeing in the department." Chief Rodriguez leaned forward. "Officer, before we go any further, is there anything you'd like to say about last night's traffic stop?" Mercer's mind raced. Deny? Apologize? Defend? His usual excuses felt hollow even to himself. I was just doing my job, sir." Dr. Washington raised an eyebrow. "Were you? Let's review what your job actually is. Is it to pull over drivers without cause? To intimidate citizens? To lie about smelling alcohol?" Each question hit like a physical blow. She had heard everything, remembered everything. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "Dr. Washington," she corrected him, just as she had the night before. "Dr. Washington," he repeated. "No, that's not my job." She nodded, just once. "Good. We agree on that much." Chief Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Mercer, I won't sugarcoat this. What happened last night was unacceptable. Under normal circumstances, this kind of behavior would result in serious disciplinary action, possibly termination." Mercer felt the floor drop out from under him. 10 years on the force, gone because of one traffic stop. One driver who turned out to be the wrong person to mess with. However, Dr. Washington cut in, "These are not normal circumstances." Mercer looked up, confused. "As of yesterday, this department has new leadership in internal affairs," she explained. "And I'm approaching things differently than my predecessor." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city for a moment before turning back to face him. "I'm not interested in simply firing officers and moving on. That doesn't solve the underlying problems. What I want is real change, Officer Mercer. And sometimes, the people who have been part of the problem are exactly the ones who can help create solutions." Mercer blinked, not understanding where this was going. "Starting next week, I'm implementing a new program," she continued. "It's comprehensive retraining for officers who have shown patterns of problematic behavior. You, Officer Mercer, will be one of the first participants." Chief Rodriguez slid a folder across the desk. "This outlines the program. 6 months of additional training, community service hours, and riding with senior officers known for their community relations skills. During this time, you'll be on probation." Mercer reached for the folder with a slightly shaking hand. This wasn't at all what he had expected. "Why?" he asked before he could stop himself. "Why not just fire me?" Dr. Washington's expression softened just slightly. "Because firing you would be easy, Officer Mercer. It would make headlines for a day, maybe 2. Then the department would hire someone new, and nothing would really change. I'm not interested in easy solutions. I'm interested in lasting reform." She walked back to her chair but remained standing. "Make no mistake, this is your one chance. I'll be monitoring your progress personally. If you can't or won't change, you won't remain on this force." For the first time since entering the room, Mercer looked directly into her eyes. There was determination there, and something else, a genuine hope that he could be better than he had been. "I understand," he said, and was surprised to find that he meant it. The training room smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. Officer Mercer sat stiffly in the back row, arms crossed over his chest. Around him, 5 other officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They were the first group in Dr. Washington's reform program, each selected for similar patterns in their service records. "This is a waste of time," muttered Officer Chen from beside him. 3 weeks of this nonsense, plus community service? I should have just taken the suspension." Mercer said nothing, just stared straight ahead. He'd been saying as little as possible since that morning in the chief's office. Keep your head down, get through this, and move on. That was his plan. The door opened, and Dr. Washington walked in. Unlike the night of the traffic stop or the meeting in the chief's office, today she wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style. She looked more like a college professor than a high-ranking city official. "Good morning," she said, setting her bag down on the desk at the front of the room. "Thank you all for being here." A few officers scoffed under their breath, as if they had a choice. If Dr. Washington heard them, she didn't show it. "I know some of you think this program is punishment. It's not. It's an opportunity for you, for the department, and for our community." She picked up a stack of thick binders and began passing them out. "Inside these binders are the materials we'll be covering over the next 3 weeks. But before we dive in, I want to start with something different." She leaned against the desk, looking at each officer in turn. "I want to hear from you. Why did you become a police officer?" The room fell silent. The officers exchanged glances, no one wanting to be the first to speak. Finally, Officer Rivera raised her hand. "My dad was a cop. So was his dad before him. Family tradition, I guess." Dr. Washington nodded. "Family legacy. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else?" "Wanted to make a difference," offered Officer Thompson from the front row. "Grew up in a rough neighborhood. Thought I could help clean it up." As others began to share their reasons, job security, excitement, a calling to serve, Mercer remained silent, eyes fixed on the binder in front of him. "Officer Mercer?" Dr. Washington's voice cut through his thoughts. "What about you?" All eyes turned to him. He shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the attention. "Same as Thompson," he said finally. "Wanted to make a difference." Dr. Washington held his gaze a moment longer than necessary, as if searching for something more in his answer. Then she nodded and moved on. The morning passed in a blur of discussions about implicit bias, historical context, and community relations. By lunchtime, Mercer's head was spinning. He wasn't used to thinking about policing this way, as something shaped by history and psychology rather than just enforcing the law. During the break, he found himself alone with Dr. Washington as others filed out for lunch. "You were quiet this morning," she observed, organizing her notes. Mercer shrugged. "Just listening." "Listening is good," she agreed, "but at some point you'll need to participate. Real change requires engagement." He looked at her directly for the first time that day. "Why me?" he asked suddenly. "I'm sorry. Why did you put me in this program? You could have made an example out of me." Firing the cop who racially profiled the new Internal Affairs Director would have been a big statement. Dr. Washington set down her papers and considered him for a moment. "Do you know what I see when I look at your record, Officer Mercer?" she asked. He tensed, waiting for the blow. "I see someone who was once a good cop. Your early evaluations were excellent. Commendations for community outreach. Then something changed around your 3rd year." Mercer looked away. He knew exactly what had changed, but he wasn't about to discuss it with her. "I don't think you're a lost cause," she continued. "And frankly, firing you would have been easy. Too easy. Real change is harder." She gathered her things and headed for the door. "I'll see you after lunch. We're doing role-playing exercises this afternoon." The afternoon session was even worse than the morning. Role-playing scenarios meant acting out traffic stops and citizen encounters while being critiqued by peers and instructors. When it was Mercer's turn, he fumbled through the exercise, hyper-aware of every word and gesture. "You're still approaching with your hand near your weapon," the instructor pointed out. "What message does that send to the driver?" "That I'm ready if things go sideways," Mercer responded defensively. Or that you're expecting trouble before there's any reason to, countered Dr. Washington from the back of the room. Try it again, but this time, consider how you'd want an officer to approach your family member's car. By the end of the day, Mercer was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. His brain hurt from confronting ideas and assumptions he'd never questioned before. As he walked to his car, Officer Chen caught up with him. "This is ridiculous," Chen complained. 20 years on the force, and now they're teaching me how to do traffic stops like I'm some rookie. Mercer was too tired to agree or disagree. He just wanted to go home. "Hey, a bunch of us are meeting at O'Malley's," Chen continued. "Blow off some steam, you should come." Mercer could imagine exactly how that gathering would go: bitter complaints, jokes at Dr. Washington's expense, reinforcement of the very attitudes they were supposed to be changing. "Thanks, but I've got plans," he lied. As Chen walked away, Mercer sat in his car, hands on the steering wheel, not yet starting the engine. For the first time in years, he found himself thinking about why he'd really become a cop. The truth was both simpler and more complicated than what he'd said in class. He'd wanted to be one of the good guys. Somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten what that meant. 3 months into the program, Mercer stood outside the Pine Ridge Community Center on a crisp Saturday morning. He checked his watch, 7:45 a.m. The basketball mentorship program didn't start until 8 o'clock, but he'd arrived early to help set up. It had become a habit now, showing up early, staying late. Actually caring about the work. He carried his gym bag inside, nodding hello to Ms. Patterson, the elderly woman who volunteered at the front desk every weekend. When he first started coming here, she had eyed him with suspicion, badge or no badge. Now she offered him a warm smile and a paper cup of coffee from her thermos. "Morning, Officer Mercer. The boys are already in the gym. They're excited about the tournament next week." "Thanks, Ms. Patterson." He took the coffee gratefully. "And please, I've told you, just call me James." Inside the gym, the sounds of bouncing basketballs and teenage laughter echoed off the high ceilings. When Mercer first got assigned here for his community service hours, he dreaded every minute. Working with teens from the very neighborhoods where he'd done most of his questionable stops. It felt like cruel irony, probably by design. But somewhere along the way, something had changed. Maybe it was when Tyler, a quiet 14-year-old with an impressive jump shot, finally opened up about how his older brother had been wrongfully arrested last year. Or when Dion, the natural leader of the group, admitted he crossed the street whenever he saw a police car coming. "Hey, coach," called a voice, breaking into his thoughts. Dion jogged over, basketball tucked under his arm. "We need you to settle something. Andrew says the Lakers are making the finals this year, but he's dreaming." Mercer laughed. "Let's warm up first, then we can debate basketball predictions." The morning flew by in a blur of drills, scrimmages, and good-natured trash talk. By 11 o'clock, the boys were sprawled across the bleachers, water bottles in hand, as Mercer went over strategies for next week's tournament against the Westside Community Center team. As the session wrapped up, Mercer noticed a boy he hadn't seen before sitting alone at the far end of the bleachers. He looked about 15, thin and tall, with the lankiness of someone who hadn't grown into his height yet. "Who's that?" Mercer asked Dion quietly. "That's Ray. He moved here last month. Lives with his grandma now. He's cool, just shy." After the other boys had left, Mercer approached Ray, who was still sitting alone, scrolling through his phone. "Hey there, I'm Officer Mercer. James. I run the Saturday basketball program." The boy looked up, his expression immediately guarded. "I know who you are." Something in his tone made Mercer pause. "Have we met before?" Ray stood up, nearly as tall as Mercer despite his age. "No, but you pulled over my grandma last year. Made her late for her night shift. She almost lost her job." Mercer felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "I'm sorry, I don't remember." "Why would you?" Ray cut him off. "Just another black woman in a beater car, right? Nothing special about that stop for you." The words hit hard because they were true. How many stops had he made just like that? How many lives had he disrupted with his routine checks that were anything but routine? "You're right," Mercer said quietly. "I don't remember that specific stop. And that's part of the problem." Ray looked surprised, clearly not expecting that response. "But I'm trying to be better now," Mercer continued. I can't undo what I did to your grandmother, but I can apologize, and I can try to do better going forward. Ray studied him for a long moment. My grandma says people don't really change. Maybe most don't, Mercer admitted. But I'm trying. Would you give me a chance to prove it? We could use another tall player on the team. After what felt like the longest pause of Mercer's life, Ray shrugged. I'll think about it. It wasn't much, but it was something. As Ray walked away, Mercer sat down heavily on the bleachers, the weight of his past actions pressing down on him more than ever. He was still sitting there when Dr. Washington walked in. He hadn't seen her since the last training session 2 weeks ago. Officer Mercer, she greeted him. I thought I might find you here. He stood up quickly. Dr. Washington, I didn't know you were checking up on me today. Not checking up, just checking in. She sat down on the bleachers and gestured for him to join her. The center director says you've been doing great work with the boys, even volunteering beyond your required hours. Mercer shrugged. They're good kids. They are, she agreed. And they deserve officers who see that. She looked at him thoughtfully. You know, when I put this program together, I knew it would be challenging. Change is never easy, especially when it means confronting parts of ourselves we'd rather not look at. Mercer thought about Ray, about his grandmother, about all the stops he couldn't even remember. I just met a kid whose grandmother I pulled over last year, he said suddenly. I don't even remember it, but he does. His whole family does. Dr. Washington nodded. That's how it works. For us, it might be just one more traffic stop in a long day. For them, it's a moment that defines their relationship with law enforcement, maybe for years. I get that now, Mercer said quietly. I didn't before, but I do now. For the first time since he'd known her, Dr. Washington smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes. That, she said, is exactly why this program exists. She stood up and gathered her bag. Keep it up, Officer Mercer. You're making more of a difference than you realize. As she walked away, Mercer realized something surprising. For the first time in years, he felt like he was becoming the officer he had once wanted to be, one of the good guys, for real this time. 1 year to the day after that fateful traffic stop, Mercer stood at the back of the community center auditorium, watching as people filed in for the town hall meeting. The room buzzed with conversation as community members, officers, and city officials found their seats. A large banner hung across the front wall, Building Trust, Police and Community Reform, 1 year later. Nervous? Asked Officer Rivera, appearing beside him. A little, Mercer admitted, never been much for public speaking. You'll do fine, she assured him. Just tell your story. That's all people want to hear. Mercer nodded, straightening his tie for the 10th time. He wasn't in uniform today, none of the officers were. Dr. Washington's suggestion. Tonight wasn't about badges and authority, it was about people talking to people. The lights dimmed slightly, and Chief Rodriguez stepped up to the podium. After welcoming everyone, he introduced Dr. Washington, who rose to enthusiastic applause. Mercer noticed how different the response was compared to a year ago, when her appointment had been met with suspicion from both the department and the community. Thank you all for coming, Dr. Washington began. 1 year ago, we started a journey together, a journey toward a police force that truly serves and protects all members of our community equally. We've made progress, but we still have a long way to go. She outlined the changes implemented over the past year. The new training programs, the community outreach initiatives, the revised use of force policies, and the accountability measures that had resulted in both disciplinary actions and commendations. But statistics and policies don't tell the whole story, she continued. Real change happens person by person, interaction by interaction. Tonight, we'll hear from people on both sides of the badge who have been part of this journey. Mercer listened as community members shared stories of both negative and positive experiences with law enforcement. Some expressed hope about recent improvements, while others remained skeptical. A few officers spoke about their experiences with the new training and community engagement programs. Finally, Dr. Washington returned to the podium. Our last speaker tonight is someone with a unique perspective. A year ago, Officer James Mercer and I had an encounter that could have ended very differently. Officer Mercer, would you please join me? A hush fell over the room as Mercer made his way to the front. As he passed the first few rows, he spotted Ray and his grandmother sitting together. Ray gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. At the podium, Mercer looked out at the sea of faces, some friendly, some curious, some still wary. He took a deep breath and began. Most of you know me as Officer Mercer. Tonight, I'm just James. I've been a police officer in this city for 11 years. For a lot of those years, I wasn't the kind of officer this community deserved. The honesty of his opening seemed to catch people's attention. Even those who had been checking their phones looked up. A year ago, I pulled over Dr. Washington without cause. I didn't know who she was. I just saw a black woman in a nice car in an upscale neighborhood, and I made assumptions. Assumptions I'd been making for years. Mercer described that night, not sparing himself in the retelling. He talked about his shock when he realized who she was, his fear of losing his job, and then the unexpected opportunity he'd been given to change. I could stand here and tell you I'm a completely different person now, but that wouldn't be honest. Change doesn't happen overnight. I still catch myself making assumptions sometimes. The difference is, now I recognize them for what they are, and I make a different choice. He talked about his work with the youth basketball program, including the championship the team had won 3 months ago. He mentioned Ray without using his name, explaining how being confronted by the family member of someone he'd wrongfully stopped had affected him. The hardest part of this journey has been facing the harm I caused, not just in dramatic ways, but in small daily interactions that chipped away at people's sense of safety and dignity. I can't undo that harm. All I can do is acknowledge it and try to do better going forward. As he concluded, Mercer looked directly at Dr. Washington. A year ago, I thought Dr. Washington was punishing me by putting me in her program. Today, I understand she was actually giving me the chance to become the officer I always should have been. For that, I'm grateful. The applause that followed was scattered at first, then grew stronger. As Mercer returned to his seat, several hands reached out to shake his. Ray's grandmother nodded at him with something like respect in her eyes. After the formal program ended, people mingled in small groups, officers and community members talking together without the usual tension. Mercer found himself surrounded by teenagers from his basketball program, including Ray, who had finally joined the team 3 months ago. "Coach," Ray said quietly, pulling him aside. "My grandma wants to know if you'll come to dinner next Sunday." Mercer looked over at Ray's grandmother, who gave him a small smile. "I'd be honored," he said, meaning it. As the crowd began to thin, Dr. Washington approached him. "Powerful speech, Officer Mercer." "Thank you, Dr. Washington. I meant every word." She smiled. "I know you did. That's why I've recommended you for a new position. We're creating a team of officers to lead community engagement and train new recruits on bias-free policing. I think you'd be perfect for it." Mercer was speechless for a moment. "Are you sure?" "Very sure. Sometimes the most effective teachers are the ones who've had to learn the hardest lessons themselves." She handed him a folder. "Think about it and let me know on Monday." As Dr. Washington walked away, Mercer opened the folder and skimmed the description of the new role. It wasn't a promotion in the traditional sense, no raise, no added authority. But it was a chance to make a real difference, to help ensure that other officers didn't make the same mistakes he had. Outside the community center, the night air was cool and clear. Mercer looked up at the stars, thinking about how different his life had become in just 1 year. He thought about all the traffic stops he'd made before that night, all the lives he'd touched in negative ways. He couldn't change the past, but the future was still unwritten. As he reached his car, he glanced back at the community center, where the lights were still on and people were still talking. For the first time in his career, he felt like he was truly part of the community he had sworn to serve and protect. Not separate from it, not above it, but a part of it. And that, he realized, made all the difference.